Dracula is the most famous vampire novel of all time. It was first unleashed on a terrified public in 1897. In 1897, the author Bram or Abraham Stoker came to the end of a 7-year journey of the mind through a place he'd never visited called Transylvania, the land beyond the forest.
Welcome back to the Synaxis podcast. I'm Jordan.
I'm Josh.
That was a clip from the documentary series Nightmare, the Birth of Victorian Horror. And we're going to be borrowing some interesting tidbits from that because today, if you didn't already notice, we're talking about Dracula.
Spooktober episode.
Spookytober, vampire extravaganza today on the Synaxis podcast. We're going to get into the history and folklore of vampire legends. We're going to talk about Bram Stoker's novel and some of its adaptations, especially the Netflix Dracula from 2020 and Coppola's 1992 film. And we're also going to dive into some interesting Orthodox Christian sources about vampires and vampirism at the end. And I think it's going to be a bloody good show. Anyway, so yeah, we decided that we wanted to do like a Spookytober Halloween themed episode, and we weren't really sure what it was going to be. And then we landed on Dracula for a couple of reasons, and it ended up being really interesting to look into the history of the folklore and everything, and Bram Stoker's novel,
which really popularized like the modern idea of the vampire for sure. A lot of it, the ideas come from Bram Stoker.
Yeah, he basically just synthesized all of the knowledge he could find on it from his research.
Yeah, the full, like a lot of like Romanian folklore and Strigoi, like a lot of the different creatures that someone might not initially associate with a vampire, but then have come to kind of like amalgam a bunch of different creatures into his own idea of Dracula.
Yeah, and this was the first time I read the book for this. I don't know how it took me this long to get around to it, but I really enjoyed it. I thought the novel was awesome, and I can see why there are so many adaptations of it, but I don't think any of them ever actually really adapts the book.
Yeah.
Like somehow all these people have tried, but maybe it just doesn't translate to film.
I mean, it makes sense. The two Draculas I watched were very different from each other.
Yeah.
So
something I didn't know, or something that the documentary really goes in pretty good depth about that I thought was interesting is some of like the inspiration that where Bram Stoker got these ideas from.
Yeah, this was interesting. I had no idea about any of this either.
Yeah. So apparently the seed for what became the novel was this reoccurring nightmare that Bram Stoker had about like 3 seductive vampire women.
In the moonlight opposite me were 3 young women. I thought I must be dreaming. There was something about them that made me uneasy. Some longing, and at the same time some deadly fear.
If you look at his notes, he even had the lines that Dracula says when he busts in. He's like, "Get away from him, that man belongs to me," and stuff. Like he had all that stuff in his head already before writing the book. That was like the main set piece that everything was centered on.
Yeah, because these 3 characters from the seductive vampire women definitely just become the brides of Dracula in the book.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of this stuff is based on his local surroundings and real events. And I don't know at what point he decided it was going to be a vampire story, but in the documentary, they'd go to the libraries that he would have been at, and they find the books that he drew from. There's one book called The Land Beyond the Forest by Emily Gerard. She also wrote an article called Transylvanian Superstitions. It's a more condensed version of that book. There was another book called The Book of Werewolves by Reverend Sabine Baring Gould. We'll talk about that book too. And an account of the Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia by William Wilkinson, and that was where he found the name Dracula for the first time. There's a footnote in that, and they show all this in the documentary. There's a footnote in that book that says,
Dracula, in the Wallachian language, means devil. The Wallachians were at that time, as they are at present, used to give this as a surname to any person who rendered himself conspicuous either by courage, cruel actions, or cunning.
And so all of these things were what inspired Bram Stoker to write the novel, and he incorporated all of it in there.
Yeah, even though he never ended up going to Eastern Europe.
He never went himself. Yeah. He just learned about it from all the literature he could find.
And there's quite a bit of literature from Eastern Europe about like vampire folklore. So
yeah, and these books are all public domain. You can find them online. It's really interesting to look back at them. They're so thorough, and there's so much crazy information in all of them. And we'll talk about those. There's actually a really good, actually, as soon as we planned doing this episode, our friend sent us a link to like, it was really just like Halloween resources, like Orthodox Christian Halloween resources. I think the website's called Daimonologia. We'll link that. But that has like a separate subheading of like vampire resources. And I went through those, and there's like so much interesting stuff in there that we're going to bring up too. Some of it was about Vlad Dracula, and everybody knows him as Vlad the Impaler. It's like cruel warlord who impaled all his enemies on stakes and like struck terror into the...
Yeah, and would like eat meals around it and would like be fazed by the brutality.
Yeah, exactly. He was supposed to be this brutal warlord. And I've read a couple articles that were saying that most of that stuff might be propaganda.
Yeah, it gets so hard to tell over time because there's a lot of stuff that passed on through time that's almost certainly propaganda, but it really captures like something and people just latch onto it. Like the "Let them eat cake," the quote from Marie Antoinette, was certainly not from Marie Antoinette, but it became this thing that people repeat throughout history, even though the bank citation needed.
Inspired the uprising against her.
Yeah.
And Vlad Dracula himself he's a war hero in Romania. He helped defend the country from the Turks during the reign of the Ottoman Empire. And even in like, I think I want to say the 70s or 80s, the communist regime in Romania was trying to rehabilitate his image as this like national hero. And yeah, it's really hard to know the truth of all that stuff. But his cousin is a saint in the Romanian church, Saint Stephen the Great, the Prince of Moldavia, and they fought alongside each other. They both defended the country from the Turks. And it's interesting to read the life of Saint Stephen because he's also credited with like a revival of Romanian culture, and he built like all these monasteries.
Oh, he's the one I think it said he built a monastery for every time he defended Romania against the Turks, so he ended up building 44 monasteries.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's right. And so I was wondering, like, why isn't Vlad a saint also? And maybe besides like the stories of his cruelty could be true.
Yeah.
I'm not totally writing them off, but I also read that he apostatized from Orthodoxy to Roman Catholicism, so that would kind of
disqualify sainthood.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it would be kind of weird to have Saint Dracula, Saint Dracula icons and stuff. But with that said, I wanted to jump into some of the vampire legends and the folklore, because we brought up the book The Land Beyond the Forest by Emily Gerard, which was a big inspiration for Bram Stoker, and she was married to like a commander of some kind of battalion that was stationed in Transylvania. So she stayed there with her husband for a few years and started learning about the culture. And so she wrote a lot about their beliefs and stuff. And I read the article Transylvanian Superstitions, which is like a condensed version of this huge book that she wrote. And it talks about the superstitions of the Transylvanian Romanian people. And she kind of breaks it up into three categories. There's the indigenous superstition of the Romanians, who are the oldest inhabitants of that country. There are imported superstitions, like old German customs and beliefs from like Saxon colonists and some surrounding cultures. And then there's also the wandering superstitions of the Gypsy tribes, which I think she gives the most credit to them for kind of, they're like the biggest source of most of like the legends that we know of. She says the Gypsies can be considered the direct cause and mainspring of the superstitions in that area. And she goes through all these like kind of wild superstitions. So she writes, the Greek church to which the Romanians exclusively belong has an abnormal number of feast days. Perhaps the most important day in the year is St. George's, the 23rd of April, the eve of which is still frequently kept by occult meetings taking place at night in lonely caverns within ruined walls, and where all the ceremonies usual to the celebration of a witch's Sabbath are put into practice. The feast itself is a great day to beware of witches. Something you don't really see in a lot of the movies is that in the novel, Jonathan Harker is going up to Dracula's castle on St. George's night, and all the peasants are like, "You're going to Castle Dracula? What are you doing? What do you think?
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Why are you doing this?
Yeah.
This is unwise. Take a cross."
Do you know what tonight is? Tonight is St. George's night. That's when all the witches come out. That's when all the undead come out. Like it's kind of like the idea of Halloween, where it's like supposedly like
the veil between the spirit world and this world,
thinnest or whatever.
It's like the witching hour kind of thing too.
Yeah, all the spooky stuff starts happening. It's like, you don't want to go to Castle Dracula tonight of all nights, dude. And so that's in here. Oh, and it also says here, in the night of St. George's Day, so say the legends, all the treasures begin to burn, and the light they give forth is a bluish flame. That's in Dracula in the novel, when Jonathan Harker's being brought in the carriage to Dracula's castle, there are all these like blue flames everywhere, and it's supposed to be showing where treasure is hidden.
Isn't in the 92 movie? I don't think there's. Is there flames, or they like go through like a blue force field or something?
Yeah, it shows like blue flames, and then Keanu's like,
bloody wolves chasing me through some blue inferno.
wolves chasing me through a blue inferno.
Yeah, it's kind of.
So they reference that in there. The Feast of Saint Spiridon. This is another. It's just amusing to me, kind of. Feast of Saint Spiridon is the 12th of December. It's an ominous day, especially for housewives, and the saint often destroys those who desecrate his feast by manual labor. I've never heard anyone talk about, like, if you do something wrong on a saint's day, they're going to come and...
I also have never heard anything about that.
They're going to come and attack you or something. Like, I don't know. I don't know what else to say about that. Oh, man, this part is kind of... There's some more interesting stuff, for the lack of a better term. But the Romanian does not always endeavor to keep the evil one at arm's length. Sometimes, on the contrary, he invokes the devil's assistance and enters into a regular compact with him. Supposing, for instance, that he wishes to ensure a flock, garden, or field against thieves, wild beasts, or bad weather, the matter is very simple. He only has to repair to a crossroad, at the junction of which he takes up his stand in the center of a circle he has traced on the ground. Here, after depositing a copper coin as payment, he summons a demon. That's a really popular folk tradition, I guess, that you go when you go to the crossroads at night and make a deal with the devil. I mean, that's what happened to like Robert Johnson, like the blues guitar.
I was gonna say that's like modern popular culture about like selling your soul and stuff, right?
Yeah, and they depict that in Faust too. Faust goes to the crossroads and does a magic circle, and that's how he summons, or the Murnau film. That's how he summons the devil in that.
And that's probably even an older callback to like the Solomonic magic, trying to draw circles and summon demons and control them with rings and.
Yeah, totally. And obviously, none of this stuff is compatible with orthodoxy. This is all fringe, occult, black magic stuff that we would not. I feel like it goes without saying we would not participate in this. Oh, and the magic circle also comes up, sort of in Dracula. And also in like the adaptations,
definitely
the Netflix one, the Netflix one, they kind of have something like that in there. And the last thing I saved from this particular article is something that's going to come up later, but she talks about this thing called the scholomance, and it's like the Romanians had this belief that there's this like mystical school somewhere in the mountains, in the Carpathian Mountains, where
underground, in the mountains, right?
Maybe in a cave.
I think when I read about it, it said it was underground. That the initiates had to spend 7 years learning without seeing daylight.
Yeah, this just says the heart of the mountain. So yeah, it could be like in a cave up in the Carpathians, and the devil himself teaches people the black arts. Basically, it's basically like a satanic Hogwarts.
It's kind of a good way.
In the mountains, and Van Helsing mentions it briefly in Bram Stoker's Dracula, where he says that like the Count attended the scholomance and learned black magic from the devil himself.
And the etymology of that's almost certainly a reference to Solomon, right?
Yeah, I read that the scholars theorized that it comes from the name Solomon, which makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Like you brought up, because they have like this Solomonic magic and
and a lot of old traditions, but it definitely becomes a lot of anyone drawing circles on the ground and trying to summon things and use rings for power. Like that's the old, like the keys of Solomon kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that was like a Hebrew,
and there's Islamic versions too, where he controlled. Yeah, they control demons through the use of rings that supposedly like Archangel Michael was supposed to have given him.
Yeah, he had a magic ring so he could summon demons and have them. He has them build the temple.
Yeah, totally.
The Temple of Solomon is apparently built by contract worker demons. That Solomon summoned, or at least in the folklore.
And there was a lot of fighting over like where it originally came, because a lot of those manuscripts are from like the medieval, it's like 15th, 16th century, but they always claim that they're far older. And then there's like big debate on where the myths come from, because it looks like a big mix of like, sometimes it talks about jinn from Islam, sometimes it's like Hebrew and Kabbalistic kinds of sources. And so eventually over time it's like a big mishmash of Solomon controlling demons. I think in one of the references, he asks one of the demons what what will stop him from having power. And he says that in the future, there'll be a man born of a virgin who is the only one that can stop his power, which is an interesting reference for something really old.
Yeah, I don't know if I read that. That's cool. And we just celebrated the feast day of Kyprian and Justina.
Good feast day. Super.
Yeah, they're definitely some of my favorite saints.
Yeah, same.
I love their stories so much. And we've talked about them on the podcast before, I think in the comic book episode. We brought them up. And they're like the perfect saints for the Halloween season.
Absolutely.
If anybody doesn't know the story, like a quick summary, Saint Cyprian was actually a sorcerer back in like the 3rd century. And he had been brought up as a child, like from infancy, in occultism and magic. And he became like a really renowned sorcerer. People would come to him for all these different things. And he was given with authority over demons, kind of like Solomon.
Yeah, totally.
And a young rich man wanted to seduce this virgin Christian girl named Justina, and she wouldn't give in to any of his advances. So he was getting frustrated, and so he hired Kyprian to try to use his magic on her to seduce her.
Yeah, use spells and create like a love potion, something that'll work.
Yeah, and he summoned demons to go and tempt her and like give her lustful thoughts about this young man and stuff, and she warded them all off with prayer and the sign of the cross, and the demons were terrified of the cross and they couldn't do anything to her, and Kyprian was like so amazed that there was like this weak little virgin girl was able to defeat his power. And then I think he just wanted to learn more about like what is this symbol that she's using, like where is she getting this power from. And in the story he confronts the devil face to face, and he says, why are your demons weak against this girl, like what's happening? And then the devil like attacks him.
He's big mad when he hears that.
yeah he gets enraged and he attacks Kyprian, and Kyprian remembers the sign of the cross, so he makes the sign of the cross. The devil flees, and that's when Kyprian like realizes, oh, I think I'm a Christian now.
Yeah.
and he sincerely repents, and he converts.
And doesn't he go to like a bishop and say like, baptize me?
Yeah, please baptize me right now. Like he wouldn't leave the church until they baptized him, and at first they didn't trust him. They're like, wait, aren't you that weird?
Yeah, like, we know of you. You're the sorcerer guy. Yeah.
But then they realized how sincere he was, and they baptized him, and he quickly went up the ranks. Just like before, when he was a young pupil of the occult, he was like a great student, and he climbed up the ranks, became a priest, and ultimately a bishop, and then he was martyred with Justina. But I love that story, and it's so infused with the idea that the demons fear the cross, and the whole idea of him. I don't know if I mentioned it, but like part of the story is that he was sent to Mount Olympus. There was some like black magic satanic Hogwarts on Mount Olympus, which has like this weird parallel to that Romanian superstition about the scholomance, like this mysterious black magic school in the mountains. It's crazy how all these themes overlap.
Yeah.
I just brought that up because it felt relevant, and Kyprian and Justina are close to my heart for sure.
Fans.
Another book we mentioned that Bram Stoker was inspired by is called The Book of Werewolves by Reverend Sabine Baring-Gould, who, he was this clergyman. He wrote the hymn Onward Christian Soldiers and like almost 100 other books. I only had a chance to skim this. I got the feeling that the author is pretty skeptical about werewolf stories, but his project is to just matter-of-factly record all the legends and the folklore surrounding it, from like, he goes through Nordic and Native American, Eastern European, Indian and Asian legends. He's super thorough.
Cool.
And he's obviously a really highly educated guy, but he seems to just attribute, from what I kind of gleaned from it, he seems to attribute the legends just to like human cruelty and cannibalism, and maybe like people mythologize to try to understand the depths of human depravity or whatever.
Yeah, okay.
So like the man turning into a beast is kind of like symbolic.
A metaphor of being taken over by your passions, or
because some people are just evil and bloodthirsty, and it's sometimes hard to like come to terms with that.
Yeah.
But while I was skimming that book, I did find this kind of interesting excerpt in the chapter. It's chapter 10, The Mythological Origin of the Werewolf Myth. I don't remember exactly the context of this, but I pulled this out because I thought it was cool. Popular mythology in most lands regards the soul as oppressed by the body, and its liberation is considered a deliverance from the burden of the flesh. But it may be remarked that the Christian religion alone is that which raises the body to a dignity equal to that of the soul, and gives it a hope of ennoblement and resurrection never dreamed of in any mythological system.
Yeah, he's pointing out that a lot of folk traditions are Gnostic, where the body is bad and imprisons the spirit, and you need to escape. It's a common theme in a lot of old stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I really liked, I just really liked the way he termed that, where the Christian religion alone raises the body to a dignity equal to the soul, and gives it a hope of ennoblement and resurrection never dreamed of in any other mythological system. And the theology of the body is going to be an important theme as we go through all this different vampire stuff. I mentioned earlier the Orthodox Vampire Resources website, which I'll link, which is really cool. And it has a lot of stuff about Greek and Eastern European legends, the Vrikolakas in the Strigoi. I'm not sure if I'm saying those right. Something that jumped out at me, there's the idea that like this vampire curse happens to people who died after having been excommunicated from the church. They died outside of the church, or their parents or themselves had dealings with like occultism and witchcraft. They somehow gave themselves over to like the dark forces.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the almost universal myths across cultures. Like you'll find stuff from different Asian cultures and like that say a very similar thing. That through either like messing around with occultism and witchcraft, you can become the kind of thing.
Yeah. So yeah, like there are all these legends from, all over the world. And you were telling me some really interesting stuff about like the Asian legends.
Yeah, there's weird commonalities between them that are pretty funny. Like although there's not really an explicit version of vampires in the way that we think of them, like blood sucking, but there is like a lot of like revenants, like reanimated corpses for some kind of means. So they're like zombies. Sometimes I guess people will pay priests if someone dies poorly. They'll pray and the person's not buried. They'll pay they're supposedly paid Taoist priests to like hop their bodies back to graves and stuff like that. But one of the weird commonalities between Eastern European and Asian folklore is that vampires, or I think they call them Jongsi, is that they're neurotic. This is like the arithmomania one, is that there's certain Eastern European lore that vampires are neurotic, and if you drop a bag of coins, they have to stop pursuing you to count the bag of coins. And that's exactly in the Asian one too. It says exactly the same thing, that if you drop a bag, it doesn't explain it, but it says if you drop a bag of coins, it'll stop and count the coins so you can get away. Which is, I think, where the Sesame Street's The Count comes in. Like, I never thought about that until I read this, and I was like, whoa, do vampires count stuff?
That's so funny.
Yeah, it's a really funny, weird connection from like really disparate cultures.
Yeah, I've read that before too. I always thought it was so bizarre. Like you have to like drop some like seeds or something, and they have to count them. And yeah, that's definitely part of a lot of the legends. And in the Greek and European legends I was reading, it's almost like like we said, it's usually people in the town who died outside of the church or with some like unrepented like grievous sin, and the townspeople experience it as like almost like a curse on their town. Like the livestock and their crops start dying, and then I guess people start getting killed or people die mysteriously, and they think they're being haunted by an evil spirit or like this like a revenant of somebody who died, and it's almost like they're possessed by a demon, but it seems like it comes in the form it comes in is like this weird mixture of like witches, werewolves, vampires, like all mashed together.
Yeah, that's really what the Asian ones feel like. It's definitely less of a vampire thing, and it's some kind of undead creature that's kind of mixes the qualities of those three things.
Yeah, and they have all these superstitions with how to deal with them, and most people know them by now just because of Dracula, like staking through the heart.
Yeah.
They're afraid of the sign of the cross.
Afraid of sunlight.
Yeah, you're supposed to like cut off their heads and stuff their mouths with garlic. They have all these different ways of dealing with them. And we'll talk about the Orthodox response to that later on. But in all these legends, reading about this stuff made me think of like modern day things having to do with like blood injections. I don't know if Bram Stoker had this in mind, but one of the things that's usually associated, besides Vlad Dracula, there's also the story of Countess Bathory, who was like, I think she was like a Hungarian royal. And like there were legends about her, how she kept herself young and beautiful by abducting young maidens from the villages and bathing in their blood and stuff.
That's a really common Asian one too. I forget, like Cambodia or the Philippines has a name for something like that. That's like a witch-like woman who usually steals either pregnant women or babies to remain youthful, something like that. That's like another oddly common one, that are feminine creatures trying to remain youthful through occultism and usually the stealing of blood or babies.
Yeah. I feel like I've come across that in a lot of places too. And it just makes me think of like some of the weird modern things that are happening with like people like Brian Johnson and Peter Thiel.
And Ambrosia, that company.
Ambrosia. I don't know too much about that, but
I think that's the one where you can pay a lot to have them put young people blood inside of you.
Yeah. That's my understanding of it too.
What if you could reverse the aging process simply by getting a blood transfusion?
That's what a new company called Ambrosia claims to do, and they just opened a new facility right here in the Houston area.
Rekha Mudaraj spoke to the founder to find out how young blood works.
It's a controversial startup. Ambrosia is the brainchild of Dr. Jesse Karmazin, and right now there are 5 clinics located across the U.S. Karmazin says 150 people have already gone through the process, and several of them have even done it a second time.
My name is Jesse Karmazin, and as you heard, I'm the founder of Ambrosia, and we're a company interested in making you young again.
Dr. Jesse Karmazin believes the fountain of youth is filled with blood, young blood, preferably that of a person under the age of 25.
But you have like these rich transhumanists who are trying to use blood to stay young and healthy and vibrant and not age. And it seems like they have this like pathological fear of death. And maybe I'm being an armchair psychologist right now, but it seems like they probably have this weird like nihilistic, obviously unchristian view of like the afterlife, and probably don't even believe there's an afterlife. Like this is the only one we have,
So you better stay alive as long as you can.
Yeah. And they have this idea that maybe like through technology they'll be able to stave off death. And it's weird that it takes the form of like stealing blood.
Yeah, it is.
Putting it in yourself.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy. And you know, you also have all these rumors about like elite people eating.
Yeah, you can't say the thing, but yeah, totally.
And that's another thing that it goes through all throughout history, the idea
Absolutely.
of ritual cannibalism. And you read about like the Aztecs devouring their enemies, like literally eating their organs. And
yeah, many African tribes do the same thing.
Yeah, and people still do that to this day too, even though it's like not reported on as widely. And you sent me this article.
Yeah, eating people is wrong, but it's also widespread and sacred.
By Ben Thomas, the 20th of April, 2017, an essay in Stranger Lands. It's some web publication, sapiens.org. Can transcendence be attained by embracing the strongest taboo of all? That's so funny. I didn't realize that when I first read this, I didn't realize that it was kind of a like, it's really bad, but maybe it's good.
Yeah, totally.
So weird.
Yeah.
Cannibalism is not uncommon. Humans have long enshrined the consumption of human flesh in sacred ritual, not just a few times, but again and again in almost every corner of the globe. And we'll link this to, for ancient Egyptian pharaohs, cannibalism guaranteed eternal afterlife. For druids, it might have been connected with agriculture and fertility. For others, cannibalism served as a tool of empowerment and intimidation.
I think that's most the way I heard about it, is people trying to gain the traits or like courage and strength of people that they had eaten.
Yeah.
So some kind of empowerment through eating things, like that you are what you eat.
Yeah, this whole idea of like eating flesh to gain some kind of immortality, that's a huge theme. That's all over the vampire legends and Dracula in particular. And we saw in especially like the Greek and European legends, excommunication from the church is what turns you into this like undead creature. And so like I immediately started thinking about communion, like the imagery of like for Christians for eating the actual body and blood of Jesus, but it's not like his dead body, it's his risen body. And the idea is that we actually are literally eating God and taking on the properties of divinity. And this seems like a demonic like inversion of that idea.
Absolutely. Eating fallen people instead of the risen God.
Yeah. And being condemned to eternal death on earth.
Yeah.
Instead of eternal life in heaven. It's like the entire, it's totally inverted. And it made me think of, there's a really bad Dracula movie, Dracula 2000. I haven't watched it since it came out, but I remember it being horrible. But one thing that stuck with me in it is that like the twist is you find out that Dracula is actually Judas Iscariot, and like after he betrayed Christ, he hung himself, but then he was cursed like with this undead vampirism, and that's why he's like terrified of the cross and silver and all these things work on him, because like he betrayed Christ.
Oh, interesting.
And I thought that was a cool idea. Like symbolically, it works really well. And he's like the ultimate personification of excommunicating yourself from the church, like turning your back on Christ. There's a fresco of Judas. I don't know in which church it is, but there's a fresco of him leaving the Last Supper, because he leaves early to go and betray Christ, and he's going out the door with a demon on his shoulder.
Yeah.
But where he was standing is his halo, and it's empty. Yeah. Because he left it.
Yeah, I've seen that one.
And that's really powerful.
Is that when it only shows one eye of him too?
Yeah, they almost always show him just like from the side.
Yeah,
you can
totally.
see one of his eyes, and it's usually how they show
demons. Yeah,
too, with just the profile, like the flat profile.
Yeah, because icons of saints will always have two eyes, so you can see it.
Yeah. And so even though that movie sucks, that part of it is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's another one of those things that sounds cool when I hear it. I'm like, oh, that's probably really good. But I'm sure if I sit down to watch Dracula 2000, I'm not going to be super impressed.
No, not at all. And that was one thing in the Netflix show that really jumped out at me. And that was kind of the thing that made me want to do this podcast in the first place. Because one of the big changes, or one of the big innovations that they made to the Dracula story is that when he feeds on somebody, he takes on their properties. So like when we first see him in his castle with when Jonathan Harker goes there, he's all old and decrepit.
Has a really thick accent.
Yeah, he's got the really thick Eastern Transylvanian accent, and but then he starts like slowly, he starts feeding on Jonathan Harker in the night, and Jonathan Harker starts kind of slowly degenerating.
Yeah,
and Dracula gets younger, and he has this English accent. And you find out that the Dracula actually takes on the properties of the people he feeds on, and he has to choose carefully who he eats, which is one of the reasons why he's going to England, because he wants to feast on the aristocracy.
Yeah, totally. Be sophisticated.
And he literally says in one scene, "You are what you eat." And so like that was the first thing where it kind of rang in my mind. It was like, oh, this is like an inversion of communion.
Yeah.
I saw an interview with the writers of the show, and they were talking about the themes, what they wanted to get across. And the article was written from the point of view, I think it's in a Christian article, and they took some quotes from a podcast that Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss did about the Dracula show.
Yeah, the article is called Dracula's Atheist Writers Acknowledge Western Debt to Christianity.
Yeah, so this was the thing that really intrigued me about the show and why I watched it, because I saw this article, and I like Stephen Moffat's writing for the most part. I like his Doctor Who stuff.
Yeah, I don't think I'm familiar with him aside from this.
Yeah, so this article is all about how like these atheist writers, they were adapting Dracula, and they knew that it had like all these Christian undertones, and they were talking about how they wanted to take those seriously even though they're not Christian at all. And so it goes to them as saying,
one of the things we had to struggle with as a couple of aging atheists is you can't ignore the fact that Dracula fears the cross. So we were determined to treat that seriously. You know, it's all very well for us in our modern world to dismiss all that stuff. In more frightening times, that icon of morality sort of built a civilization, even if we kind of don't think that way.
So they have this pragmatic view of Christianity that like we get all our morality, and like our civilization is based on this central, they would see it as a myth.
Yeah, like a noble lie maybe.
Yeah, this story that teaches us how to live. And it was cool to see them have some kind of deference for that.
Yeah.
And they also had this idea of writing the story arc. Like there's a character in the book, Sister Agatha. She's barely in it. When Jonathan Harker escapes Dracula's castle, he takes refuge in a convent, and Sister Agatha's I don't think she's the Mother Superior, but she's one of the nuns there. And so they wanted to give her more of to flesh out her character more. And they wanted to give her like this story arc where she's struggling with her faith, but then like when she confronts Dracula, she regains her faith. And hearing them talk about that, I was like, oh man, I want to watch this.
Yeah, totally.
It still comes through in the show that these people are atheists.
Definitely.
And so like when they try to do that, it doesn't land all that well. but I appreciated it.
Yeah, I think it was. I think I told you in person that I liked the idea of it. Like when I read this and I heard about that, I was like, oh, you're gonna have a nun struggling with her faith and then like regaining her faith through fighting Dracula. Like it sounds cooler, I think, when I think about it than how it was executed at times. Some parts I really liked of it, but some of the dialogue of Agatha, like dealing with all the stuff, was definitely not my favorite.
Yeah, totally. And she's kind of the central protagonist of the show. Mm-hmm. She overshadows the other heroes of the novel, and they ended up combining her with Van Helsing.
So yeah, I was going to say
she becomes Sister Agatha Van Helsing, which I thought was a fine twist.
Yeah,
it was cool. Because they realized, like, wait, we already have, as they were writing her, and they were thinking about incorporating Van Helsing, they're like, oh, we already have like the vampire slayer expert in this character that we've been writing, so we might as well just have her have her take that function.
So like give her that last name.
Yeah. And I thought it was cool.
Yeah.
And her entire mission in the show is to try to figure out why all these rules that Dracula, like the idea, he can't go out in sunlight, he's afraid of the cross, he can't enter
a domicile without being invited.
Yeah, he can't enter
any area, I guess.
And it's any like closed off kind of sanctuary, or domicile is a good word, I guess. Like without being invited. And one of my favorite scenes is when Dracula tries to attack the convent, and he's standing at the gate, and Sister Agatha goes up and opens it, and she says, "You are most specifically not invited in," and he can't like cross the threshold.
Yeah, sick, confident power move.
Yeah,
like, open the gates. You're like, you're not allowed in, and he just stands there like frustrated.
Yeah, she says something like, "Oh, it really does work," and the nuns are like, "You didn't know it worked?"
Yeah, totally. Like, that was the test run. Like,
yeah, but that whole scene, that whole confrontation between the two is pretty epic. And he gets inside, and like the nuns all have crosses, and they're wielding their crosses at him, and he's kind of he shrinks away from him. He shies away from him, and he's like, "Oh, that really does work," but you'll never guess why. And so it's kind of one of the mysteries of the show. It's like, why did these things work on Dracula? And then it kind of slowly unfolds where it's like in one of the episodes, there's another confrontation between the two characters, and she says something like, "You fear the cross because it's a symbol of virtue and righteousness," and he's like, "No, actually the opposite of that. I fear the cross because I've eaten too many simple peasants who see the church as this like tyrannizing force."
Yeah.
And they're
struck with horror when they see the cross.
Yeah.
Thing, yeah.
And she says, "No, that's not why." And it's kind of a nice moment where it's like you can see that cuts him down, and he's like bluffing. And Stephen Moffat mentions this in the interview too. He says that like she calls him on his bluff. He was trying to feel confident and in control of the situation, but like she just cuts that out from under him, and we're meant to trust her when she says, "No, that's not why."
Yeah, it also shows Dracula kind of getting owned. Like, you could tell by his body language that he knows that it was a cope. That's not the real reason the crosses work on it.
Yeah, and then the third episode is the one that everybody hates. I kind of liked the third episode. A lot of people hate it. Maybe I won't even spoil what they do in that one. Or we'll spoil the very end, like the reveal, because that's thematically, that's what I'm trying to talk about. But the reveal at the end of why all these things work didn't really work for me.
I just feel the same.
I liked what they were going for, but I think it was too colored by their atheism, and it's just kind of like, it's kind of basically nihilistic. But it turns out that all of these rules are basically just placebos.
Kind of. That kind of is what it amounts to at the end.
Yeah. I think she says, like, you're afraid of the cross because it's a symbol of facing death with courage.
Mm-hmm. And you can't do that.
And you've spent your entire, like, you've devoted your entire existence to not dying, to not facing up to death. And you're so afraid to face it that the cross fills you with shame, and that's why you shy away from it. Which also, it doesn't explain any of the other stuff. But it's almost like a psychological placebo effect.
Yeah,
he's convinced himself.
Totally.
All these legends.
She's pretty much like, you can step into the sun, it's not going to hurt you.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, you've just convinced yourself over all this time that you're going to die. And then he steps in the sun and he's totally fine.
Yeah, it was one of the things I really liked is like at the end they recreate the finale from the Hammer Dracula, where Van Helsing runs across the table and takes down the curtain in the sun. In that movie, the sun kills him. But in this, it doesn't do anything. Or he's horrified by the sunlight, and then he realizes it's not hurting him. And she's like, "It was all a lie. Like, you just convinced yourself that these things work on you because you're like this neurotic."
Yeah, totally.
You just have this neurotic, pathological fear of death, and that's the only reason why, you're afraid of crosses. It fills you with shame and all that stuff. And I get it.
I get what they're trying to go for, but yeah, it wasn't my favorite ending.
Yeah, that's what fell flat for me, because they obviously don't believe in any of this stuff. So it's kind of like it's definitely a very atheist way to wrap up that story. There's a section in the podcast with Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss where they're talking about the fear of the cross and how they're kind of baffled by, they're like, Christianity is such a bizarre religion because its central symbol is the death of God. Like, it's the only, I think he says something like, it's the only religion where God dies at the end.
I mean, it's an unusual religion, Christianity, because its symbol is what they killed God with. And it's one of the few religions where God dies at the end. It's an extraordinary idea.
Yeah, you're hanging a crime scene around your neck.
Well, yeah, but it's extraordinary. That's the example you're meant to follow. Dead by 33 in shattering agony? Well, can I not? I sometimes wonder what Karl Marx could have meant when he said religion is the opiate of the masses. What did he think an opiate was? If you're a serious committed Christian, which I certainly am not, the example you have to follow is terrifying. But isn't it terrifying?
Isn't it, because it's a symbol of coming back, of rebirth.
But they don't really do that. They don't have it's not the open cave, is it? It's not springing back, I'm fine.
And you can tell that colored the way they wrote the ending. And it just feels like such a
misunderstood symbolism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even Mark Gatiss in that part, he says something like, well, isn't the point that he rises again?
Okay.
And then Stephen Moffat's kind of like, yeah, but it doesn't really.
Let's ignore that part.
Yeah. And so, all of that kind of nihilism, because like that quote from Reverend Sabine, where he says, like, he talks about the dignity of the resurrection. And the resurrection's the entire crux of Christianity. And even like St. Paul says, like, if we don't rise from the dead, then what is the point? If there is no resurrection, then all of this is worthless. And we also talked about it in the Where Are You, Adam review, because in that there's a really great sermon from the abbot of Dokariu Monastery in that documentary where he's talking about the same thing. It's on Pascha, and he's talking about the dignity of the resurrection and how the resurrection gives us meaning. And it just imbues meaning on everything else. And if everything just ends in death, then what's the point of anything? And you can see that, like we said, that colors the ending of the Dracula miniseries, which is, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth.
Yeah, kind of.
And it just undercuts everything. And then Dracula finally does face death because he drinks her blood, which has cancer in it.
Yeah, he like suicide via cancer blood.
Yes, yeah. And I guess it's supposed to be some kind of redemption story arc for him, which I get why filmmakers do that, because you kind of need that in a story structure. But doing that with Dracula always falls flat for me because he's a monster.
Yeah.
And they always try to humanize him and make him the tragic hero, and it never really works for me. They did that in the Francis Ford Coppola one as well. And you watched that too.
Yeah.
But in that one, they tried to do like a faithful adaptation of the book, but then they also added this heroic story arc. They tried to make Dracula this sympathetic, tragic hero. So, and it was kind of cool how they incorporated like the Vlad Dracula stuff at the beginning, and they made him like Vlad the Impaler, where they show him defending Romania from the Turks, and he's fighting for the church and for church and country, and then the Turks
like shoot a letter in, right?
Yeah, they shoot an arrow with a letter on it into the palace where his wife, his Queen Elizabeth, is there, and the letter says that Dracula died on the battlefield, and so she's filled with despair and she jumps into the river and ends herself. And then Dracula comes back from the war, and I guess they had fished her out, so they have her dramatically displayed like in front of the altar in the chapel in his castle. And Anthony Hopkins is there as an Orthodox priest, he also plays Van Helsing, which was kind of a nice touch.
Yeah.
And the first thing he says when Dracula comes in is like, suicides go to hell. Your wife's in hell.
Yeah.
Like, dude, come on, man. And so he gets enraged and he's like, I devoted my life to the church, and this is what I get. This is the thanks I get. And so he renounces God and stabs the cross, and all this blood starts coming out, and I guess and he drinks the blood, and I guess that turns him into a vampire or something.
Yeah.
And so then it gets into the actual story, and then you find out later that Mina Harker, Jonathan's wife, is somehow a reincarnation of his wife from the beginning. I've traveled oceans of time to find you.
Totally.
There's like this weird romance between them that it's not in the book. Like they just kind of jammed all that in, and it didn't really work for me. And I guess, I don't know, I guess I'm saying all this stuff to drive home the point about like Dracula being a hero. I don't know. In the book, he's the monster.
Yeah.
He's the threat that they have to overcome. And I think it works, to me, that works much better, but I guess those are my sensibilities.
No, I definitely agree with you. The whole having Dracula be like like the tragic hero at the end it didn't really land for me in any of these cases.
Yeah, and it's interesting that like there's a lot of I like about that movie.
There were actually parts of the movie I did like.
Yeah, the filmmaking is really well done. All the special effects and a lot of the acting is pretty good.
Keanu Reeves is the best Jonathan Harker for sure, dude.
Number one, S tier. Keanu Reeves.
Yeah, it was a weird casting choice.
I think they were trying to get Johnny Depp, but the studio wanted Keanu for some reason.
It's a star-studded cast, which is cool.
I mean, Gary Oldman's an amazing actor.
Gary Oldman is an amazing actor.
And Anthony Hopkins as Van Helsing.
Winona Ryder's in it.
Winona Ryder's fine. She's weaker, but Keanu kind of takes the spotlight off of her.
Yeah.
But one of the interesting things in this is like, so Sister Agatha's in this movie too, more like she is in the book though, where it's just like Jonathan Harker escapes from Castle Dracula and goes to, in the book it's Hungary, so it's like a Catholic monastery. Their Sister Agatha takes him in and nurses him back to health. In the movie, it's still in Romania, so it's an Orthodox monastery. And then Mina goes out to meet up with him, and they get married in an Orthodox ceremony, which they filmed in like this...
In L.A.
At this Greek church in L.A. with a real Romanian priest. And they did the actual marriage ceremony.
They're married.
Yeah. So they're like...
So you didn't know they're really married now.
Which is a weird thing, because I don't think they're baptized. Like, it doesn't really work out.
Yeah, I don't think so. But I guess they'll joke about it. Or, cause they'll stay in contact, and Keanu Reeves and Winona Ryder will be like, hey, husband, hey, wife.
Officially Orthodox.
Yeah.
But it's kind of cool, because Coppola, in making this movie, he
brings up orthodoxy being like...
Yeah, he came to really appreciate like Orthodox Christianity, and he says, like, he's quoted in the director's commentary on the DVD. He says,
the Orthodox religions, Greek Orthodox, Romanian Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, is in fact the original Christianity. And for my part, I think the most beautiful expression of Christianity, the Roman Catholicism, is Christianity having been fused with the Roman Empire, and really, I think, has more to do with the Roman Empire than it does with Christianity. I found the actual Romanian Orthodox churches, when I did go and spend time in Romania, which I did recently, making Youth Without Youth, very beautiful. Maybe it's because I wasn't raised in it, and I'm able to see it as an expression of spiritual feelings in terms of Christianity in a form that I don't find oppressive and mean, which is how my childhood impression of religion was.
And there's an article about it where they add a little bit of commentary, and they say like, oh, it's really cool that he appreciates, the beauty of Orthodoxy and sees it as the most beautiful and authentic expression of Christianity. But then they take issue with his idea of like Catholicism being Christianity fused with the Roman Empire, because Rome was also Orthodox for 1,000 years, which is probably an important point to make. But
yeah, I mean, Romanians come from Romans, right? That's what the name's.
I don't know, but that would make sense. But like with all the behind the scenes stuff is cool, and it's interesting, kind of the mindset that they were in when they talk about trying to make Dracula like this tragic hero, but they also talk about how like the Dracula story is sacramental.
I feel that Dracula is very sacramental, and Dracula in an odd way is kind of like Christ-like, and it's about the sacrament, and it's about also God's ultimate responsibility and pledge to us as well as ours to God, because God is an element in this story. And the whole question of evil, God plays a role.
I forgot exactly how they worded it, but they tried to put a lot, they consciously put a lot of Christian imagery, and they even try to make Dracula kind of a Christ figure, but it just turns out...
Yeah, it lands weird, yeah.
It lands weird. It just turns out to be Antichrist.
Yeah, for sure.
Because he's like this evil monster. Because like literally at the end when he's dying, he says like, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" And then right before his last breath, he says, "It is finished." And yeah. That's obviously Jesus on the cross. And yeah, that weird juxtaposition just doesn't really work, especially for, I don't know. It's like my Christian sensibilities coming through, but otherwise, that was an interesting movie. There's a sleaze factor in this movie that I don't like all that much. But it's so like over the top and ostentatious, and some of it really works. When it works, it works really well.
Yeah.
And when it doesn't, it's just kind of goofy.
Yeah.
Do you have any other thoughts about Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's 1992 Dracula?
It's kind of similar to the other Dracula one. Like, I liked it. There were parts of it I didn't like. I don't regret like watching it. Like it was good enough for me to be like, yeah, it was cool. It was fun to have a Spooktober thing, watching a bunch of vampire stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is another thing where it's like it's not a wholesome movie at all. And it's hard for me to recommend it, especially if,
the 92 one has a lot more nudity.
Yeah,
it has a lot of nudity compared to I don't think there was any of that in the 2021.
No,
2021 had violence, but
it
I don't
had
think
violence, and it had like sexual dialogue.
Yeah, like innuendo and stuff, but not like straight nudity.
No, neither of these things are super wholesome.
Yeah.
The most wholesome Dracula adaptation I've seen is the 1977 BBC version, and it's the closest one to the book, but it's also really dated and low budget. It's really good. We'll talk about that because I'm going to do a tier list of all the Draculas that I've watched the past 2 weeks, because I just, like I said, I went on a Dracula bender, and it was really fun. So we'll do that. We'll release that separately. The Dracula miniseries and like the Francis Ford Coppola, they're both colored by like this weird atheism, nihilism that I think, the original story is so wrapped up in Christian belief. And Bram Stoker was a Protestant, so he seems like he was pretty devout. Some of the things I read from him.
Your worldview and your metaphysic like inform your whole life. So it's probably pretty hard to have something where your worldview doesn't color things that you write,
Yeah, exactly. And so like having these adaptations go through that filter.
Yeah. There's something lost in it.
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And so on that note, like we were saying, Dracula is very wrapped up in Christian theology and belief. And the thing I've been referencing this whole time, the Orthodox Vampire Resources website has a lot of really cool articles detailing sort of the Orthodox perspective on vampirism. And there are actually some pretty diverse perspectives, but they all agree on central things.
Yeah, I liked that actually, how like there's saints who are all canonized as saints who, have differing views on like how real vampires are, but their takeaways and their prescriptions of how to deal with the stuff is the same.
Yeah. So like Saint Nicodemus the Hagurite, they have an article it's an excerpt from Saint Nicodemus where he's talking about like vampire superstitions in the culture at large, in the Greek culture at that time. They called them vrikolakas. I don't know. Vrikolakas. I don't really know how they say it, but he didn't believe in. He says like these are ridiculous superstitions. The demons don't have the power to take over bodies, and it's a silly notion. And he's very adamant about don't go around desecrating tombs and defiling corpses.
Yeah, don't dig up graves.
Like don't burn the bodies. Don't
cut heads off.
Don't cut their heads off. Don't stake them through the heart, because we believe in the bodily resurrection, and you're just defiling their corpses, and it's not doing anything to solve the problem, which in his mind is pretty much totally illusory. He thinks it's just kind of delusion on the parts of the people who believe in it. But to contrast with that, there's a Greek Orthodox handbook. I don't think it says who wrote it, but I'm sure some kind of Orthodox clergyman There's a chapter in it. It's from 1867. The book was called Nomo Canon, Various Prayers and Discourses. And there's a chapter in it called On Those Who Burn Vampires. And this author believes that they're real, but he also says he agrees with St. Nicodemus, like, don't dig them up and destroy their bodies. That's not how we deal with this. We should pray the canons to the Mother of God. We should remember them in the liturgy and bless their grave sites with holy water and the sign of their cross, and the demons will flee. And like both of these are obviously really steeped in the theology of the body in Orthodoxy, where it's like we have to respect these corpses because I think it's actually the St. Nicodemus article where he says people who defile corpses should be tried as murderers because on the day of judgment we will stand in our bodies before the throne of God. And so there's this very deep belief in the bodily resurrection. And like we saw in that werewolf book, I really loved how he put it, how it's like the only religion that really dignifies the human body in that way. And the resurrection is the thing that gives it that dignity. And that kind of makes Van Helsing in the book kind of just like an insane dude.
Yeah.
I love him as a character, like within the fiction of the book. I think he's awesome. But if he was really going around and like staking bodies and cutting off their heads and shoving garlic in their mouths, and another thing that always makes me uncomfortable, like with the book and the movies, is when he uses like the Catholic communion wafers as a weapon.
Yeah.
That I really don't like that. That feels super sacrilegious.
Yeah.
And I guess it would be a little bit different if they weren't consecrated, but they are. Like, that's the whole idea of it. Like, this is actually the body and blood of Jesus, and they're using it to like burn vampires, and like they break it up and they put it in a magic circle. And that was another thing I did, like in the Dracula 2020, that made me uncomfortable too, where they like tear up a Bible and make a magic circle with pages of it. It's like, that's ill-advised in my view. But you also have these really interesting accounts from like the lives of saints that are on here, things that could be interpreted as sort of vampire phenomena, but it's almost as though like these are the original stories, and then there's like a telephone game.
Yeah, absolutely.
That becomes what we know of it now. Because there's another article is on Saint Dionysius of Zakynthos. I want to say 1400s. I looked this up before, but I don't remember. But there's a story in the life of Saint Dionysius of Zakynthos where a woman died outside the church. She had been excommunicated for some reason during her life, and her family came to ask him to pray for her. And as they're in church late at night praying, they brought her into the church, and Saint Dionysius was like praying absolution for her after death. And they set it up in the stalls, in the monastic stalls. And then as they were done praying, she like bowed her head and then crumbled, and that was a sign that she had been forgiven, and she had found salvation after death.
I like that too because it emphasizes prayers for the dead.
Yeah,
which is not common among like.
Oh no, that's why like that whole thing with Father Anthony Hopkins at the beginning of Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Oh, she's going to hell.
Yeah.
Sorry, dude. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're like, what?
Nothing you can do about it. She's damned forever.
Yeah.
That's probably not how a priest would deal with that.
I can't imagine a priest dealing with it like that, dude.
Where he would be like, no, you have to pray for her soul. There's still hope, even though, it is officially the teaching that self-unaliving is like a grievous sin that can't be repented of after death. There's still hope. There's always hope. And these stories show that you can pray for the dead and they'll find rest. And that's really beautiful.
Yeah.
There's another story. The article is titled "A Case of Vampirism in the Lives of the Saints." And it talks about, there's a book by another clergyman, I think he was an English clergyman, Montague Summers. He wrote like a tome about vampires and vampirism. It came out in 1928. It's called "The Vampire, His Kith and Kin." And he tells a version of a story from the Synaxarian that talks about a monk in Alexandria who had been excommunicated for some act of disobedience. It doesn't specify what. So he left the monastery and went to the city, and they were persecuting Christians at that time. And they swooped him up, and they wanted him to offer a sacrifice to the idols, and he refused, and he was martyred, but he still was dead outside the church. And so the next Sunday during liturgy, in Montague Summers' version, the corpse of that monk came into the back of the church and stood there the whole time. And
he's in the narthex.
Yeah, he's in the narthex, which is really symbolic because he was excommunicated.
He's out of the church, yeah.
And then after liturgy, it returned to its grave. And it says the whole community was filled with awe and confusion, and a nun of great piety, having fasted and prayed for a space of 3 days, received a revelation from an angel who informed her that the Cenobite, which is a monk, was still excommunicated because he disobeyed his superior. And they had to find his superior who excommunicated him, and he came and gave him absolution and lifted the ban of excommunication. And they opened his tomb. Yeah, they opened his tomb and prayed over his body, and a full absolution was pronounced. Thereafter, he laid at rest. And this article is interesting because they went back to the source and translated it, and they said that instead of a corpse getting up and walking, it was actually the entire coffin was carried into the narthex, presumably by angels, to remind them to pray for this monk who was martyred. And that's just another story that hammers home the whole idea of like praying for the dead, even if we think they're lost. Yeah. They're not always totally lost. And but you can see how this evolved into like, oh, people who are excommunicated, like, they get up out of their graves and they come to haunt us.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that like these are probably the seeds of those legends of like the excommunicated coming back from the dead. But I wonder if it's interesting we have one saint saying that like vampirism is completely fantastical and ridiculous, and then we have other, I guess it wasn't technically a saint, but other people who, accepted it. I think Saint Cosmos of Aetolia believed in vampires. So I'm kind of undecided on how real they are.
Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering if, because it makes you think of like Saint Anthony the Great or some of these saints that were attacked by demons, like literally. Yeah. So I wonder if some of the vampire stuff is demonic attacks, or like maybe like delusions or illusions that demons, like tricks the demons are playing on people to convince them that, or maybe they even wanted them to come defile corpses and stuff.
That wouldn't surprise me at all.
Maybe.
Especially since so many of the traditions have the idea that you could become a vampire through messing with the occult. It's just like possession.
Yeah.
You just have been messing around with the wrong stuff, and all of a sudden you're taken over by something that's not you.
Yeah, totally.
What do you think about vampire stories like captivate people? Because they're kind of one of those things that like people will get pretty into, like intuitively. Something about vampires people like. Same with like zombie things, like certain things culturally like emerge and then like really captivate a lot of people.
Yeah. That is a good question. There's something appealing about them.
Yeah, it's
like definitely for me, I really like the good versus evil stuff, and I love how rooted in Christianity, especially like Bram Stoker's is, even though it has like weird kind of detours and they weaponize communion, which is weird too.
Yeah, for sure.
But I still there's something really compelling about that, and then there's something like attractive and repulsive about Dracula at the same time, especially in his like more theatrical depictions. Like in the book, I don't think there are really any scenes where he's actually charming.
Oh.
He's mostly just a monster, and he's mostly in the background. Like you see him interacting with Jonathan Harker in the castle, and then it becomes almost like a slow burn, like thriller mystery thing where he's like in the shadows. And I would like to see an adaptation where they do it more like that. But it's kind of like it's come to the point where it's like he has to be like this sexy, like
now vampires are sparkly and like it definitely really turned a thing where vampires like are an attractive kind of bad guy.
Yeah,
you're kind of captivated by,
and they're trying to, like, they promise you eternal youth and stuff, but then there's also the twist where it's like it's eternal youth, but
it sucks.
It's lonely and it's painful, and there's no love. There's like
everyone dies. You watch everything you've ever liked go away.
It's totally cold and stuff. But I remember like being a teenager watching vampire movies and being like, oh man, it'd be so cool.
Yeah, it was kind of what reminded me. Because something about it too. I definitely thought vampire stuff was pretty cool.
Yeah. So there's something like both beguiling and repulsive about it. haven't had a chance to read the whole thing, but like, well, one of our priests gave me a copy of Monsters from the Id, which is a book by the notorious EMJ.
Nice.
The people might know who that is. I don't know. Is it illegal on?
Dude, I don't know. I don't know. He's a cool guy. I like him. I'd talk to him. He's cool. Obviously, we're going to lean Orthodox and not Catholic, but a lot of E.M. Jones's work is good. I'm a fan of quite a lot of his work.
Yeah, and so this is his book he wrote. The subtitle's The Rise of Horror in Fiction and Film. And I only had a chance really to read the chapter on Dracula. And I felt like I was dropped into the middle of an argument that I'm not sure. Like, he's making points. I don't have the full context of what his argument is. So like I was a little bit in the dark about what he's going for. But he makes, I know like the basic argument in this book is that like the monsters in all these monster movies are images of like almost like a repressed conscience in people.
Yeah.
And like he wraps up the vampire myth and especially the Dracula novel with like lust and sexual sins, which makes a lot of sense. And then he spends a lot of time talking about how it's almost an allegory for like syphilis and like this contagion that travels through like these lustful sins and stuff. And it's like,
he doesn't have to write. I remember there was I think I remembered hearing something. I mean, he gave a talk back in the day that, yeah, someone maybe ended up with something like that and then wrote one of these stories.
Yeah, well, Bram Stoker died of syphilis.
Yeah.
And like a lot of, he mentions also like, I think it's Baudelaire, Schopenhauer, and Maupassant. They all died of syphilis. And it's like, oh, that actually, I didn't know that. But
yeah, like, oh, okay.
Nietzsche also.
Yeah, totally.
Bram Stoker seems a little bit more grounded in some kind of faith. I don't know.
I'm not exactly sure, but I saw some quotes of him talking about Jesus. Maybe he's Protestant, at least somehow respects the Bible and Jesus. He calls him like the master in the quote or something. I read it and was kind of like, oh, you're definitely some kind of Christian.
I would have liked to research him a little bit more, but I mostly only learned like some pretty just kind of surface level stuff about him. Like he was Protestant. He was friends with people who were Freemasons and in the Order of the Golden Dawn and stuff, but people don't really know how involved he was personally with that. That's a little off topic though, but yeah, like so I would like to read the whole book and read it in the context of his argument, but like the idea that monsters are like a surfacing, like this emergent property of some like parts of our conscience that maybe we're ignoring or something.
Yeah.
Because I've heard people describe other chapters in this book where it talks about like slasher movies and the whole idea of like the killer comes for the people who are promiscuous.
Yeah, it's always some of like immorality that someone's engaging in. And it's like, yeah, if you're gonna go have sex in the forest in a horror movie, you're getting killed immediately. Like it's just one of the things.
Yeah, exactly. They get all hacked up in the innocent virgin girl is the
It's totally a common trope in horror movies that the virgin survives, and someone goes to do drugs in the forest, they die. It's really like people giving into vices and passions in a crazy situation that ends up getting them killed, and the person who refrains from it, whether explicitly religious or not, usually avoids the problems.
Yeah, but those movies, you can interpret them that way, and I think there is like I think there's a psychological truth to that, or a spiritual reality of that's what those things are portraying, but it doesn't. That doesn't make those movies like wholesome.
Yeah,
there's something so I don't know exactly what it is. There's something so sleazy and gruesome. And I used to I still have like a soft spot in my heart for them, but like that's why I'm so conflicted. It's like I like horror stuff, but I don't know how healthy it is.
Yeah, totally.
It feels like a really like dark fascination.
Yeah,
it keeps coming back to that weird like attractive and repulsive thing about it that for some reason it's compelling, but my favorite part about these is how they overcome it. I think that's the most compelling part about these stories, is to see how the heroes in them are that get through it. Get through the struggles. And like even though it was really clumsy and it was written by atheists, they wrote the sermon for like this Mother Superior of Sister Agatha's convent. She gives this sermon about like, where do we find God? We don't find him in prayer. Yes, we do. But she says that we don't find him here or there. We find him like when we're in our darkest hour and we still like have the strength to believe in him and call on him and like live virtuously in the face of evil is like the gist of what she said.
Yeah.
And I liked that for the most part. But it was still it's still like coming from like the atheist nihilist perspective, there's something really shallow and empty.
Definitely.
In that, like this idea that like morality for morality's sake, it just kind of, there's a dead end there. Like there's got to be something more. They don't believe in the metaphysical stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's what is so awkward about both of the Dracula adaptations we talked about. Is like they're treating metaphysical things and it's like it's all fantasy and stuff, but then they're also trying to mix it with some like their version of reality, which is nihilistic and doesn't have. I think it's essentially a Christian story.
Yeah.
And so there's something missing when that element's not there, and they try to like ride around it.
Yeah, like when Agatha at the end of it was like, "Oh, I have the courage to die. I don't need this anymore," and like throws the cross down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's what leaves me unsatisfied, even though I still found stuff to enjoy in them. It's a mixed bag.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think it feels like it was like a worthwhile exercise. Like there's really interesting ideas in there, and the idea of communion and theology of the body, and just the theology of good and evil and all of the like implications of that.
Yeah.
I think are the worthwhile things in them. Anyway,
maybe next Spooktober we can do a different one. We'll do.
I
like
was thinking
zombies
Frankenstein would be cool.
Oh, that'd be sick. Yeah,
like because you got the Promethean stuff.
Oh yeah.
I've read the book in a long time, and I feel like there are interesting themes there.
Yeah.
So maybe if we're still doing this next spookytober time, which hopefully I'm sure we will. Frankenstein seems like a good option. I also would like to learn more about the witch trials, because my only knowledge of that is like pop culture stuff, and I feel like
and that is pretty bad.
Yeah, I feel like there's interesting stuff to uncover and all that stuff too. So maybe Frankenstein or witch trials or something Spooktober-y next time would be fun.
Check social medias.
Yeah, follow us on our socials on the website that was formerly Twitter.
Yeah, do people just call that X now?
Follow us on X. It feels weird to call it that though. Like, follow our X page.
Yeah, it's weirder.
And follow our Instagram. Sub on YouTube. Metal Mystic video. It's gonna get here when it gets.
Dude, it's coming.
It's coming. I keep getting derailed and hyper focused on other things, but it's been slowly coming together. It's happening. It's gonna happen. You guys, I promise.
It'll be worth it. It's gonna be a good one.
Yeah, it will be good. It's been a hard one. I've had a lot of writer's block, and I'm still trying to pull it together. But
people keep showing up to the comments though to be like, "Where's the next one? It's good."
Yeah, that's really encouraging, and I have to do it. I actually have some fans, so I have to give them what they want. And it's gonna be a bit, but it's almost there. We're almost there. What else we got going on? Oh, check out buy some merch. We have some merch. I'll put some merch links. We got t-shirts and mugs and hoodies and stuff that you can buy. Maybe throw some small donations. Buy us a coffee at our Ko-Fi page. I think that's it.
Until next time, God bless.
Bye. Happy Spooktober.
Happy Spooktober.
Blah.
Now, this is something you may not have seen. It is a small replica of a tawaka. The real thing is much bigger, of course, and when struck, the very sound of it scares off every vampire within hearing distance. Now, I'm no expert, of course, so perhaps a proper demonstration would be in order. In Romania, the sounding of the tawaka is a ritual performed by the priests several times each day. Now, should you not succeed in scaring off the vampire, you must certainly destroy it at the earliest opportunity.